Commander Zethkar had witnessed the fall of 17 star systems. He had seen entire fleets reduced to cosmic dust, watched as civilizations that had endured for millennia crumbled in mere hours. In his 4 centuries of military service across the Galactic Coalition, he thought he understood the true face of war. He was wrong. The humans changed everything. Not with their technology, though it was admirably crude and effective. Not with their numbers. They were barely a footnote in galactic census records. They changed everything with something far more terrifying. Their absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when logic, mathematics, and every strategic doctrine in the known galaxy screamed that surrender was the only rational choice. Zethkar would later write in his memoirs that the day he met humanity was the day he learned the difference between fighting a war and becoming war itself. This is that story, told through the compound eyes of a Veltar commander who thought he had seen everything, until he saw what happened when you backed a human into a corner and threatened everything they loved. Some species fight until they can't. Humans fight until they can't, and then they fight harder. The first time Commander Zethkar of the Veltar Dominion encountered humans, they were losing. Badly. The tactical display aboard his flagship, the Eternal Mandate, painted a picture that any military academy graduate could read in seconds. The human colonial fleet defending the Kepler 442 system was outgunned, outnumbered, and completely outmatched by the Hiveketh invasion force bearing down on their populated worlds. Zethkar's 4 arms worked efficiently across his command console, his chitinous fingers dancing over controls that had guided him through countless battles. As the Coalition's military advisor to this sector, he was here to observe and report, not to intervene. The Galactic Coalition had strict policies about emerging species conflicts. They could observe, but direct intervention was prohibited until formal membership was achieved. Sensor analysis complete, Commander, reported his aide, Lieutenant Kexare, her antennae twitching with nervous energy. The human fleet consists of 47 vessels, mix of military and converted civilian ships. The Hiveketh attack force numbers 231 ships, including 3 Dreadnought-class vessels. Zethkar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully as he studied the data. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The humans didn't stand a chance. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, still using chemical propulsion for many of their ships, kinetic projectile weapons, and basic fusion reactors. Against the biotechnological supremacy of the Hiveketh, with their living ships and quantum disruption weaponry, it would be a massacre. Time to engagement? He asked, though he could see the countdown himself. 17 minutes until the Hiveketh fleet reaches optimal firing range, Commander. The humans have established a defensive perimeter around their primary colony world, Kepler 442b. Population approximately 12 million. 12 million. Zethkar had seen entire species with populations in the billions reduced to scattered refugees. 12 million was barely a rounding error in galactic demographics. Still, each life lost was a tragedy, even if the strategic importance was minimal. The communication array crackled to life. Coalition vessel. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. We're detecting your ship on long-range sensors. Are you here to assist? Zethkar activated the translator and replied, his voice carrying the formal cadence required by Coalition protocol. Admiral Chun, this is Commander Zethkar of the Galactic Coalition vessel Eternal Mandate. We are here as observers only. Coalition policy prevents direct intervention in conflicts involving non-member species. There was a pause that lasted several heartbeats. When a human admiral's voice returned, it carried no anger, no pleading, only a grim acceptance that surprised Zethkar. Understood, Commander. We appreciate your honesty. If you're planning to observe, you might want to move to a safer distance. Things are about to get messy. The connection ended, leaving Zethkar staring at the tactical display with newfound curiosity. In his 4 centuries of experience, species facing impossible odds typically responded in one of 3 ways. They begged for help, they fled, or they surrendered. The humans had done none of these things. Instead, Their admiral had shown concern for his safety. "Commander," Kexaray's voice carried a note of confusion. "The human fleet is rearranging itself. Their formation doesn't match any standard defensive doctrine in our databases." Zethkar focused on the tactical display and felt his secondary brain engage as he processed what he was seeing. The human ships were indeed repositioning, but not into any configuration that made tactical sense. Their largest vessels, primitive dreadnoughts that barely qualified for the classification, were moving forward, but they were spacing themselves in what appeared to be a random pattern. Behind them, the smaller ships were forming into tight clusters. "Analysis?" he requested. His tactical officer, Major Thexvor, manipulated the display to highlight the human formation. "Unknown, Commander. The formation leaves significant gaps in their defensive perimeter. If the Hiveketh focused their fire, they could break through in multiple locations simultaneously." "Perhaps they don't understand proper defensive tactics," suggested Kexaray. "They're a primitive species." Zethkar's compound eyes studied the display more carefully. Something nagged at him, a sensation he'd learned to trust over his long career. The humans weren't arranging themselves randomly. There was a pattern here, but it wasn't one he recognized. The Hiveketh fleet continued its advance, their bioships pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as their form of communication. Zethkar had fought the Hiveketh before, during the border wars 50 years earlier. They were relentless, efficient, and utterly without mercy. Their biotechnology allowed their ships to self-repair, adapt to enemy weapons, and coordinate with a precision that few mechanical fleets could match. 10 minutes to engagement range, reported Thexvor. On the display, the human fleet held its position. No retreat, no request for negotiation, no signs of panic. Zethkar found himself genuinely intrigued despite the tragic inevitability of what was about to unfold. "Commander, we're receiving multiple communications from the human fleet," Kexaray announced. "Internal channels, but they're not encrypted. Should we monitor?" "Proceed." The bridge filled with the voices of human commanders and crew members. Unlike the formal military communications Zethkar was accustomed to, these transmissions carried an emotional weight that surprised him. "Charlie Squadron, this is home base. Sarah's kids are in the shelters on New Geneva. Make sure they stay safe." "Copy that, home base. My daughter's birthday is next week. I promised her I'd be there. All ships, this is Admiral Chun. I want everyone to remember why we're here. Behind us are our families, our friends, our future. Today, we show the galaxy what it means to be human." The communications continued, but they weren't tactical discussions. They were personal messages, final words to loved ones, expressions of determination that seemed to transcend rational thought. Zethkar had heard similar communications before, usually right before a species surrendered or fled. But the humans weren't running. 5 minutes to optimal firing range, Thexvor announced. The Hiveketh fleet began its attack formation, their bioships extending weapon appendages and charging their quantum disruptors. The energy signatures were massive, enough to crack planetary crusts if focused properly. Then, the humans did something that made Zethkar's primary brain stutter in confusion. They charged, not in formation, not with any semblance of military doctrine, but with a wild, desperate fury that defied every tactical manual ever written. The human ships accelerated to maximum velocity, their primitive engines straining beyond safe parameters. Energy readings spiked as they overloaded their reactors, pushing their technology far past recommended limits. "Commander," Thexvor's voice carried disbelief. They're overcharging everything. Their ships are showing critical stress fractures from the acceleration, but they're not slowing down." Zethkar watched in fascination and growing horror as the human fleet closed the distance with the Hiveketh. The first exchange of fire lit up the void between the fleets. Hiveketh quantum disruptors lanced out, their purple energy beams designed to disrupt molecular bonds at the quantum level. Several human ships simply disintegrated under the barrage. But the humans didn't slow down. Their return fire was primitive by galactic standards: kinetic rounds, missile barges, and basic energy weapons. Against Hiveketh bioarmor, such weapons should have been largely ineffective. Should have been. The first human kinetic round struck a Hiveketh cruiser and punched completely through its biohull. The second ship to be hit seemed to convulse as missiles penetrated its outer membrane and detonated inside its living interior. The Hiveketh vessels began adapting, their bioarmor shifting and thickening to counter the human weapons. But adaptation takes time, and the humans weren't giving them any. By the eternal code, whispered Kexare, they're not trying to win a battle. They're trying to hurt them as much as possible before they die. Zethkar realized she was correct. The human formation, the seemingly random spacing he hadn't understood, wasn't defensive at all. It was designed to maximize damage output while accepting maximum casualties. Every human ship was positioned to fire until the moment it was destroyed, with no consideration for survival or retreat. The battle became a storm of violence unlike anything Zethkar had witnessed. Human ships, their hulls cracking from overstressed engines, continued firing even as they were torn apart. He watched one human destroyer, its entire port side blown away, ram itself into a Hiveketh cruiser while firing everything it had. Both ships died in a bloom of nuclear fire. Commander, Major Thexvor's voice carried an odd note. The Hiveketh are adapting slowly. Slower than usual. Explain. Their bioships adapt by analyzing incoming weapon signatures and adjusting their defenses accordingly. But the humans are constantly modifying their weapons output, changing ammunition types, adjusting energy frequencies, even ramming when their weapons fail. The Hiveketh adaptation protocols can't keep up with the chaos. Chaos. That was the perfect word for what Zethkar was witnessing. There was no elegance to human warfare, no sophisticated strategy or advanced technology. There was only raw, desperate fury and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. A human voice crackled over the communications array. This is Captain Morrison of the UCS Defiance. My ship is gone, but I'm taking you bastards with me. The transmission ended in static as Morrison's ship, little more than a flying wreck, detonated its reactor core inside a Hiveketh formation. The explosion took out 3 bioships and damaged 2 others. The humans have lost 60% of their fleet, reported Thexvor, but the Hiveketh casualties are at 30%. This shouldn't be possible. Zethkar agreed. By every metric he understood, the humans should have been annihilated by now. Instead, they were inflicting casualties at a rate that defied mathematical probability. Not because their weapons were superior, but because they used them with a reckless abandon that the Hiveketh couldn't adapt to quickly enough. Another human ship, the Indomitable, had lost all weapons and most of its hull, but it continued flying. Zethkar watched in morbid fascination as the ship's captain ordered the evacuation pods jettisoned, not toward safety, but toward the enemy fleet, each pod carrying a nuclear warhead. They're using their escape pods as weapons, Kexare observed, her voice hushed with something between horror and admiration. The battle raged for another hour. When it finally ended, only 7 human ships remained, their hulls scarred, and their crews probably breathing recycled air thick with smoke and desperation. But around them floated the wreckage of nearly 80 Hiveketh vessels, including one of the massive dreadnoughts. The surviving Hiveketh fleet, their bioships struggling to adapt and heal from the chaotic assault they had endured, began a tactical withdrawal. They had won, technically, but at a cost that made victory taste like ash. Admiral Chen's voice, hoarse from breathing toxic air, came over the communication array one final time. Coalition vessel, this is what's left of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. We're going to repair what we can and prepare for their return. Thank you for witnessing. As the Eternal Mandate moved to assist with rescue operations, coalition policy allowed for humanitarian aid. Zethkar found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about warfare. He had witnessed something unprecedented, a species that fought not just with their technology or their strategy, but with their very souls. In his report to Coalition Command, he would write that humanity possessed a quality that transcended tactical doctrine or technological advancement. They possessed the ability to make war personal, to transform a strategic calculation into an emotional crucible that burned away everything except the will to fight. But that was later. For now, he simply watched as human rescue ships, patched together from wreckage and determination, began the grim task of searching for survivors among the debris of one of the most savage battles he had ever witnessed. The humans had lost, but somehow, Zethkar couldn't shake the feeling that the Hiveketh had lost something far more important. 3 weeks after the Battle of Kepler, 442, Commander Zethkar found himself doing something unprecedented in his 4 centuries of military service. He was voluntarily extending his observation mission. Coalition Command had approved his request to remain in human space, ostensibly to study their unique tactical approaches and assess their potential for coalition membership. The real reason was more complex. Zethkar couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. The way the humans had fought, with such desperate fury, such complete disregard for conventional tactics, had shattered his understanding of warfare itself. He needed to understand how a species could function when their primary military doctrine seemed to be fight harder when things get worse. The human colony of New Geneva bore the scars of the recent battle. Debris from destroyed ships still orbited the planet like a metallic aurora, and the orbital platforms showed hasty repairs with materials that definitely weren't rated for space construction. But what struck Zethkar most was that the humans were building, not fleeing. Admiral Chun has agreed to meet with you, Lieutenant Kexare reported as they approached the human command station. She's interesting. That was an understatement. Admiral Sarah Chun was a compact woman with graying hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths Zethkar couldn't fathom. When she greeted him in the station's observation lounge, her handshake, a peculiar human gesture, was firm enough that he felt it through his exoskeleton. "Commander Zethkar," she said, settling into a chair that looked like it had been salvaged from a civilian transport. "I have to admit, I'm curious why a coalition observer wants to stick around after witnessing our spectacular defeat." "Your defeat was..." Zethkar paused, searching for the right words in standard galactic, tactically fascinating. "Your species employs warfare methodologies that don't exist in our databases." Chun laughed, a sound that contained no humor. "You mean we fight like desperate animals backed into a corner?" "I mean you fight like no species I have encountered in 4 centuries of military experience." The human admiral studied him with those unsettling eyes. "And you want to understand why?" "Yes." Chun stood and walked to the observation window, where the scarred surface of New Geneva rotated slowly beneath them. "Tell me something, Commander. In all your centuries of military experience, how many times have you fought for something that mattered more to you than your own life?" Zethkar considered the question. Veltar military doctrine emphasized efficiency, calculated risk, and strategic preservation of resources, including personnel. Military service requires calculated sacrifice for the greater good, but that's not what I asked. Chin's interruption was gentle, but firm. "I asked how many times you fought for something that mattered more than your life. Not your duty, not your species, not some abstract concept of the greater good. Something personal." The question unsettled Zethkar in ways he couldn't articulate. "I am not certain I understand the distinction." Chin turned back to face him. "Down on that planet are my daughter and her 2 children. My grandson just turned 8 last month. When the Hiveketh came through that jump point, they weren't just threatening 12 million colonists or Terran strategic interests. They were threatening Emily's bedtime stories and Jake's collection of toy starships and Sarah's dreams of becoming a xenobiologist." She sat back down, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that made Zethkar's secondary brain fire rapid calculations about threat assessment. Every person who died in that battle was fighting for something specific. Captain Morrison? His wife runs a school on the surface. Lieutenant Park? She had 3 kids in the underground shelters. Commander Williams? He He was supposed to walk his daughter down the aisle next month. Zethkar felt his mandibles click involuntarily. But surely such personal motivations would compromise tactical efficiency. Would they? Chen asked. Let me tell you what happened after your people left, Commander. We had 7 ships left, barely functional. Standard military doctrine would suggest consolidation, defensive positioning, preparation for evacuation. You know what we did instead? She activated a holographic display that showed the system's current configuration. Zethkar stared in disbelief at what he saw. You've expanded your defensive perimeter. Every civilian ship in the system, cargo haulers, passenger transports, private yachts, we've armed them. Magnetic accelerators stripped from mining equipment. Missile pods built in civilian fabrication plants. Energy weapons that violate 17 safety regulations. We now have 234 combat-capable vessels. The mathematics made Zethkar's primary brain hurt. But the crew training, the tactical coordination, the logistical support systems are being handled by people who have never seen military service, Chan finished. Yesterday, a 60-year-old grandmother who ran a bakery on New Geneva successfully qualified on a point defense array. A teenage mechanic figured out how to modify our missile guidance systems for better accuracy. A group of college students designed a new formation pattern that our tactical computers say shouldn't work, but field tests prove is 30% more effective than standard doctrine. She leaned forward, and Zethkar found himself unconsciously leaning back. Here's what your databases probably don't tell you about humans, Commander. We're not particularly strong, we're not particularly fast, we're not particularly smart compared to galactic averages. But we have one trait that evolution carved into our bones over millions of years. When something threatens our tribe, our family, our children, we don't just fight back. We become something else entirely. Before Zethkar could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Kexare's voice crackled over his personal communicator. Commander, long-range sensors are detecting a massive jump signature. The Hive Keth are returning. Chin was already moving, her casual demeanor replaced by crisp military efficiency. How many ships? The response came from a human technician at a nearby console. 412 vessels, Admiral, including 6 dreadnoughts, and what appears to be a command bioship. Zethkar felt his exoskeleton chill. The Hive Keth had returned with nearly double their original force. This wasn't just another attack. This was extermination fleet. Time to engagement? Chen asked. 3 hours, ma'am. Chen nodded and activated the station-wide communication system. All hands, all ships, all civilians with pulse rifles. This is Admiral Chun. The Hive Keth have returned, and they're not happy about what happened last time. You know what that means. Zethkar expected panic, fear, desperate pleas for evacuation. Instead, the response that echoed through the station's corridors was something that chilled his primary brain and made his secondary brain fire emergency calculations. Cheering. The humans were cheering. Commander, Chin said, turning back to him, I strongly recommend you withdraw to a safe distance. What's about to happen is going to violate several laws of physics and most principles of civilized warfare. But Zethkar found himself unable to move. What are you going to do? Chin's smile was sharp enough to cut hull plating. We're going to show them what happens when you threaten human children twice. The next 3 hours were unlike anything in Zethkar's experience. Instead of the organized chaos of military preparation, he witnessed something that resembled a carnival, a funeral, and a revolution all happening simultaneously. In the shipyard sections, he watched a team of humans install weapons systems onto a luxury passenger liner while singing what appeared to be war songs. The weapons themselves were improvised horrors, magnetic accelerators that fired chunks of asteroid material, missile pods loaded with warheads that mixed high explosives with radioactive waste, and energy weapons that had been modified so extensively they no longer resembled their original design. In the civilian sections, he observed families saying goodbye with a mixture of tears and laughter that made no logical sense. Children gave their parents drawings to keep them safe, while parents made promises that statistics suggested they couldn't keep. But It was in the command center that Zethkar truly began to understand what he was witnessing. Final count is 234 combat vessels, reported a human officer whose nameplate read Williams, the same Williams that Chun had mentioned, who was supposed to walk his daughter down the aisle. Any word from the outer colonies? Chun asked. Confirmation from all 17 settlements. They're sending everything that can mount a weapon and achieve orbital velocity. Should add another 150 ships to our count. Zethkar's secondary brain performed rapid calculations. Admiral, even with nearly 400 vessels, your forces are outgunned by a factor of... Commander, Chun interrupted. With all due respect, you're thinking like a traditional military officer. You're calculating based on ship tonnage, weapon power, armor thickness. You're not calculating based on what really matters, which is... Chun gestured to the tactical display, where human ships were taking positions that again defied conventional doctrine. Every single person in this system knows exactly what they're fighting for. Not for humanity, not for the coalition, not for some abstract principle. They're fighting for Emily's bedtime stories, and Jake's toy starships, and Sarah's dreams of xenobiology. She activated the fleet communications array, and Zethkar heard something that made his compound eyes dilate with shock. The humans were singing. Not military hymns or martial chants, but something softer, more personal. A lullaby, he realized, something parents sang to children to help them sleep. Admiral, Williams reported, all ships report ready. The Hiveketh fleet will reach engagement range in 15 minutes. Chun nodded and opened the general communication channel. All ships, all crews, all humans in this system. This is Admiral Chun. Last time they caught us off guard. This time, they know what they're walking into. They know what we're capable of when they threaten our families. And they came back anyway. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a tone that made Zethkar's exoskeleton shiver. That was their mistake. The human fleet began to move, and Zethkar realized that what he had witnessed 3 weeks ago hadn't been desperation. It had been restraint. This time, the humans had planned. The Battle of New Geneva began with something Commander Zethkar had never witnessed in 4 centuries of warfare. Complete radio silence from the attacking fleet. The Hiveketh bioships emerged from their jump formation in perfect synchronization, their bioluminescent communication patterns pulsing with what Zethkar recognized as confident aggression. They had come with overwhelming force, 6 dreadnoughts, 47 heavy cruisers, and over 300 support vessels. By every metric of galactic warfare, this force could have conquered most sector capitals. Against them, the humans had arranged what appeared to be the most disorganized fleet in military history. Civilian ships with improvised weapons systems flew alongside military vessels patched together from salvage. Transport ships that should have been evacuating colonists instead bristled with magnetic accelerators and missile pods. Even a few orbital mining platforms have been fitted with engines and pressed into service. Commander, Lieutenant Kexaray's voice carried bewilderment. The human fleet configuration makes no tactical sense. They've spread their forces across 7 different engagement zones, with gaps large enough for entire squadrons to pass through. Zethkar studied the tactical display aboard the Eternal Mandate, positioned at what Admiral Chun had assured him was a safe distance. The human formation did indeed appear to be a tactical disaster, until he began to notice the patterns. Major HFY, he called to his tactical officer, analyzed the positioning vectors of the human fleet. Look for overlapping fields of fire and escape routes. Several minutes later, HFY's voice carried a note of confusion. Commander, there are no escape routes. Every human ship is positioned to maximize damage output while making retreat impossible. It's as if they're planning to. Fight to the death, Zethkar finished. Yes, but look deeper. Those gaps in their formation. What are the gravitational and orbital mechanics of those positions? More analysis, then they're creating kill zones. The gaps will funnel attacking ships into concentrated fire from multiple angles. But, Commander, this formation requires perfect timing and coordination. One mistake, and their ships will be firing on each other. Before Zethkar could respond, Admiral Chin's voice came over the communications array. Commander Zethkar, this is your final warning. What you're about to witness may violate several coalition treaties regarding the acceptable conduct of warfare. You might want to look away. The Hiveketh fleet reached optimal firing range and began their attack with a precise coordination that had made them one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy. Quantum disruptors lanced out in perfectly calculated patterns, designed to systematically destroy the human fleet from the outside in. The first human ships to die were exactly the ones that tactical doctrine suggested, the isolated vessels on the formation's periphery. 3 civilian transports and a light cruiser simply vanished under the barrage, their destruction seeming to confirm that the humans had learned nothing from their previous defeat. That's when Zethkar realized he was watching the most sophisticated deception he had ever witnessed. The isolated ships had been decoys. As they died, their destruction triggered a cascade of events that turned the entire battlefield into a carefully orchestrated trap. Hidden weapons platforms, disguised as debris from the previous battle, activated and began firing. Asteroid habitats that should have been evacuated revealed themselves as massive weapons batteries. Even the wreckage of ships destroyed 3 weeks earlier exploded into life as automated defense systems came online. By the eternal code, whispered Kexaray, they've turned the entire system into a weapon. But that was just the beginning. As the Hiveketh fleet moved through the gaps in the human formation, gaps that were supposed to be tactical errors, they found themselves surrounded by crossfire from every direction. Human ships that had appeared to be randomly positioned revealed themselves to be perfectly placed to create overlapping kill zones. The humans had spent 3 weeks studying the wreckage of their previous battle, analyzing Hiveketh tactics, and preparing a welcome that defied every convention of space warfare. Tactical analysis, Zethkar ordered, his 4 arms working frantically across his command console. The Hiveketh adaptation protocols are struggling, reported Thexvor. The humans aren't just using modified weapons. They're using weapons that shouldn't exist. Magnetic accelerators firing projectiles that change mass mid-flight, missiles that split into submunitions with different warhead types, energy weapons that cycle through 17 different frequencies per second. On the display, Zethkar watched a human cargo hauler, a ship that had probably been carrying grain or manufactured goods a week ago, engage a Hiveketh heavy cruiser. The cargo ship should have been destroyed in seconds. Instead, it unleashed a barrage of projectiles that seemed to defy physics. Some exploded on impact, others phased through the bioarmor before detonating inside the enemy ship. Still others released clouds of what appeared to be metallic dust that interfered with the Hiveketh's sensory organs. How are they doing this? Kexaray asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Admiral Chun had left the communication channel open, and they could hear the conversations on the human command bridge. Team 7 reports successful implementation of the Williams maneuver, came a voice over the human communications. What's the Williams maneuver? Asked another voice. Remember last time when Commander Williams rammed his destroyer into that Hiveketh cruiser? We figured if ramming works, why not do it on purpose? Team 7 just guided an asteroid into their formation using mining charges. Zethkar watched in fascination and horror as a chunk of rock the size of a small moon, propelled by carefully placed mining explosives, slammed into the center of a Hiveketh battle group. The impact destroyed 6 bio ships and scattered their formation into chaos. The Chin protocol is working perfectly, reported another voice. The enemy adaptation systems can't keep up with weapons that are literally improvised in real time. Chin protocol? Zethkar found himself asking aloud. Admiral Chin's voice answered him directly. Every human ship has fabrication equipment and creative people who are very, very angry. We're not using standardized weapons. We're inventing new ones every few minutes and using them immediately. Their bio ships can adapt to known threats, but they can't adapt to weapons that have never existed before. As if to demonstrate her point, Zethkar watched a human light cruiser begin firing what appeared to be balls of superheated plasma wrapped in magnetic containment fields. When the plasma balls struck HFY bioarmor, they didn't explode, they unraveled, releasing both thermal and electromagnetic energy in patterns that the bioships had never encountered. Where did they get plasma containment technology? Textful asked. They didn't. Chen's voice carried grim satisfaction. Sarah Martinez used to design fusion reactors for civilian power plants. Yesterday, she figured out how to turn her reactor designs into weapons. Today, half our fleet is using the Martinez plasma configuration. The battle raged for 6 hours. Unlike the desperate fury of the first engagement, this was methodical destruction on a scale that made Zethkar's military training revolt in protest. The humans weren't just fighting. They were systematically dismantling one of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy, using weapons that shouldn't work, tactics that shouldn't be possible, and a level of coordination that defied every principle of command structure. Commander, Major Thexvor's voice carried something Zethkar had never heard from his tactical officer before. The Hiveketh fleet is they're retreating. Impossible. Hiveketh don't retreat. There now, sir. Remaining fleet elements are withdrawing to jump distance. On the tactical display, Zethkar could see the impossible truth. The Hiveketh force, reduced to fewer than 100 ships from their original 400, was indeed withdrawing. But, more than that, their bioluminescent communication patterns showed something he had never seen from the species: fear. Final casualty report, he requested. Hiveketh losses, 328 vessels destroyed, including 4 dreadnoughts. Human losses, 89 ships destroyed, with another 47 so heavily damaged they'll require complete reconstruction. Zethkar stared at the numbers. In a single engagement, a primitive species using improvised weapons and impossible tactics had not only defeated but routed one of the galaxy's most feared military forces. Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication array one final time. Commander Zethkar, thank you for witnessing. I hope this gives your coalition something to think about. As the surviving human ships began rescue and recovery operations, Zethkar found himself composing a report that he knew Coalition Command would find difficult to believe. How could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he make them understand that he had observed the birth of a new kind of warfare, one that turned desperation into strategy, improvisation into art, and love into a weapon more devastating than any technology? Commander, Kexare's voice interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving a priority communication from Coalition Command. Put it through. The familiar voice of Admiral Corex Tan, his superior, filled the bridge. Commander Zethkar, long-range sensors have detected the engagement. What is your assessment of human military capabilities? Zethkar looked at the tactical display, where human ships were pulling survivors from destroyed vessels, both their own and, impossibly, from Hiveketh bioships as well. They had just won the most decisive victory in recent galactic history, and they were still trying to save lives. Admiral, he said carefully, I believe we need to accelerate humanity's application for coalition membership. Based on their military technology? No, sir. Based on the fact that any species capable of what I just witnessed needs to be our ally rather than our enemy. There was a long pause before Corex Tan replied. Prepare a full tactical assessment. Coalition Command will want to understand exactly what makes these humans so dangerous. As Zethkar began preparing his report, he realized that dangerous wasn't the right word. The humans weren't dangerous. They were something far more terrifying to anyone who might threaten the things they loved. They were unstoppable. 6 months after the Second Battle of New Geneva, Commander Zethkar found himself standing in the Coalition Council chambers, facing the most powerful beings in the galaxy. His report on human military capabilities had caused ripples throughout the galactic community, and now the Council wanted answers. Commander, spoke Council Prime Nethi Zura, her crystalline voice resonating through the chamber. Your report suggests that humanity represents a fundamental shift in galactic warfare doctrine. Some members of this council find your conclusions difficult to accept. Zethkar's four arms remained steady as he activated the holographic display he had prepared. With respect, Council Prime, I understand the skepticism. What I witnessed challenges 4,000 years of established military science. The display showed tactical analyses from both battles at Kepler 442. Counselor Vexmore of the hegemony leaned forward, his cybernetic implants whirring as they processed the data. You claim that a primitive species, using crude technology, defeated not one, but two Hiveketh fleets of superior size and capability. The mathematics are impossible. The mathematics are irrelevant, Zethkar replied, causing a stir among the assembled representatives. Honored counselors, we have been calculating warfare based on variables we understand. Ship tonnage, weapon power, armor thickness, crew training. Humans have introduced variables we never considered. Counselor Kaith of the Dominion spoke next. Variables such as the willingness to die for others, the ability to innovate under pressure, the capacity to transform any technology, no matter how mundane, into a weapon. Zethkar manipulated the display to show the improvised weapon systems he had cataloged. They turned mining equipment into mass drivers, civilian fabricators into weapons factories, even their entertainment systems into psychological warfare tools. Preposterous, declared Counselor Vexmore. No species can maintain that level of innovation and coordination without a central command structure. Humans can, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Admiral Sarah Chan walked into the council chambers, accompanied by two other humans Zethkar didn't recognize. The council had agreed to hear human testimony as part of their application for membership. Council Prime, Nethi Zera's crystalline form shifted to a more neutral configuration. Admiral Chun, the council recognizes your presence. You may address the assembly. Chun moved to the center of the chamber with the same confident stride Zethkar remembered from their first meeting. Honored counselors, Commander Zethkar's report is accurate, but I believe he's understated our capabilities. The statement sent a chill through Zethkar's exoskeleton. If Chun thought he had understated human military capabilities, then he had severely miscalculated the threat assessment. Perhaps you could demonstrate, suggested Counselor Kaith, his tone carrying skeptical amusement. The council would be interested to see human innovation in action. Chun smiled, an expression that Zethkar had learned to associate with impending chaos. I was hoping you'd ask. She gestured to her companions. This is Dr. James Park, formerly a civilian engineer. And this is Maria Santos, who was a schoolteacher 6 months ago. Dr. Park stepped forward, carrying a device that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and determination. Counselors, may I have permission to demonstrate human adaptive warfare doctrine? Council Prime Nethi Zera consulted with the other members before responding. The council grants permission, provided no permanent damage is inflicted. Park activated his device, and immediately every piece of technology in the chamber began behaving strangely. The holographic displays flickered through random images. The translation systems began mixing languages, and several counselors' cybernetic implants started playing what sounded like human music. What is this? Demanded Vexmore, his implants cycling through diagnostic routines. This, Park explained calmly, is a civilian-grade communication disruptor that Maria and I built yesterday using components from Coffee Machine, a personal tablet, and some decorative crystals we bought in the station's gift shop. Maria Santos spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the patience of someone accustomed to explaining things to children. We noticed that most galactic technology operates on similar base frequencies. With about 3 hours of research and 15 minutes of construction, we created a device that can cause temporary malfunctions in any system within 50 meters. The implications hit Zethkar like a quantum torpedo. You build a weapon using tourist souvenirs. We build a tool, Chin corrected. Whether it's a weapon depends on how we use it. Which brings me to the real demonstration. She activated her personal communicator, and the chamber filled with voices, dozens of them, all speaking in different human languages but somehow coordinating their words to create a harmony that made Zethkar's secondary brain fire emergency protocols. What you're hearing, Chun explained as the technology in the chamber gradually returned to normal, is 47 humans who have never met each other, scattered across 17 different star systems, coordinating a complex technical procedure using nothing but standard communication equipment and something we call intuitive cooperation. Counselor Tath's manipulator appendages twitched nervously. Impossible. Coordination of that complexity requires command hierarchies, predetermined protocols, extensive training. It requires humans caring about the same thing, interrupted Dr. Park. Every person you just heard has children, grandchildren, or students they want to protect. That shared motivation creates coordination that your command structures can't match, because it operates on emotional frequencies your technology can't measure. The council chamber fell silent, except for the ambient hum of life support systems. Finally, Council Prime Nethizera spoke. You are suggesting that human military effectiveness is based on emotional rather than technological factors. I'm stating it, Shin replied. Commander Zethkar's report focused on our tactics and weapons, but those are just the visible effects. The real power comes from something your species seem to have evolved away from. The willingness to sacrifice everything for something bigger than ourselves. Zethkar found himself speaking without conscious decision. Council Prime, I request permission to provide additional testimony. Granted. He moved to stand beside Chun, an action that surprised him as much as it did the council. Honored counselors, in 6 months of observation, I have witnessed humans transform their entire civilization in response to external threat. They don't just adapt their technology, they adapt their society, their thinking, their entire approach to existence. He activated another holographic display. 3 weeks ago, I observed a human colony world under attack by syndicate raiders. The colony had no military presence, no weapons, no defensive capabilities. The display showed the colony of Haven's Rest under assault by a typical pirate force. Fast ships, experienced crews, overwhelming firepower against civilian targets. The raid should have succeeded within hours. Instead, the colonists did something unprecedented. They transformed their entire settlement into a single coordinated defense system. Farmers became artillery crews using agricultural equipment. Teachers became tactical coordinators. Children became intelligence gatherers using their knowledge of local terrain. The tactical display showed the impossible. Civilian colonists not just repelling a military assault, but doing so with 0 casualties while capturing most of the attacking force intact. The raiders were so confused by the colonists' tactics that they surrendered rather than continue fighting an enemy they couldn't understand. Counselor Vexmore's implants processed the data with visible strain. The tactical coordination required for such an operation would necessitate years of training and preparation. It took them 4 hours, Zethkar replied. 4 hours from the beginning of the attack to complete victory, using equipment and methods they invented during the battle. Maria Santos stepped forward again. May I explain how we did it? The council granted permission, though Zethkar could see their reluctance. Every human settlement practices something we call community response drills, Santos began. Not military exercises, but community activities. Barn raisings, harvest festivals, school plays, emergency response to natural disasters. We spend our entire lives practicing how to work together quickly and efficiently. Dr. Park nodded. When the raiders attacked Haven's Rest, the colonists didn't need to learn new skills. They just applied community coordination to a military problem. The farmer who organized harvest crews became the artillery coordinator. The teacher who managed school events became the tactical planner. The children who played hide and seek in the forest became reconnaissance specialists. Chen smiled that dangerous smile again. What you call impossible coordination, we call Tuesday afternoon at the community center. The silence in the council chamber stretched until Council Prime Nethizera finally spoke. If human capabilities are as you describe, why do you seek coalition membership? You appear to need nothing we can offer. Chen's expression became serious. Because we're not conquerors, Council Prime. We're builders. Yes, we can fight. We can fight better than anyone in this galaxy when we need to. But what we really want is to build something bigger than ourselves. Schools and hospitals and farms and art galleries and places where children can grow up safely. She gestured to the assembled council members. You represent the accumulated wisdom and achievement of dozens of species across thousands of years. We represent the newest kids on the galactic block with more energy than sense and a tendency to solve problems by hitting them with improvised weapons until they go away. Dr. Park chuckled. We figure we could learn from each other. Zethkar watched the council members exchange the subtle communications that preceded major decisions. Finally, Council Prime Nethizera spoke. The council will deliberate on humanity's application for membership. Commander Zethkar, your extended observation period has provided valuable insights. As the session ended and the council members began filing out, Counselor Kaith approached their group. Commander, a word of advice. When you file your final report, emphasize the defensive nature of human capabilities. Some members of this council are concerned about the military implications of a species that fights the way humans do. After the counselor left, Chun turned to Zethkar. He's worried we're too dangerous. Are you? Chun considered the question seriously. To anyone who threatens human children? Absolutely. To anyone who just wants to live in peace. We're probably the safest neighbors you could ask for. As they walked toward the chamber exits, Zethkar found himself asking the question that had been troubling him for months. Admiral, what happens if the Coalition rejects humanity's application? Chen's answer chilled him more than any tactical analysis could. Then, we keep building our own communities, protecting our own families, and hoping we never have to show the galaxy what humans are really capable of when we're not trying to be polite. The implications of that statement would haunt Zethkar's dreams for years to come. 2 years after humanity's acceptance into the Galactic Coalition, Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of the newest ship in the Coalition fleet, the CNS Unity, a vessel that represented the first successful integration of human and galactic technologies. Beside him, Admiral Sarah Chun reviewed tactical displays with the casual competence that had made her humanity's first representative to the Coalition Military Command. Contact bearing 37 Mark V, reported Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, who had transitioned from school teacher to one of the Coalition's most effective tactical coordinators. Configuration matches Void Hunters, approximately 200 vessels. Zethkar felt his exoskeleton tighten. The Void Hunters were the newest threat to galactic civilization, a species of energy beings that consumed stellar matter and considered organic life to be an infection to be cleansed. 3-star systems had already fallen to their advance, their populations either killed or absorbed into the Hunters' collective consciousness. Time to engagement? Chen asked. 43 minutes at current vectors, replied Dr. James Park from the engineering station. The former civilian engineer now served as the Unity's chief of innovations, a position that hadn't existed before humans joined the Coalition. Chen nodded and opened the fleet communication channel. All ships, this is Admiral Chun aboard the CNS Unity. We have confirmed contact with Void Hunter forces. Implementation of Protocol 7 is now in effect. Zethkar watched the tactical display as the Coalition fleet, 127 ships representing 17 different species, began executing maneuvers that would have been impossible before human integration. The rigid formation patterns of traditional galactic warfare dissolved into something that looked like chaos but moved with deadly precision. Protocol 7, he asked Chun. Her smile carried the same dangerous edge he remembered from their first meeting. Something we developed after studying galactic military doctrine for the past 2 years. Your people fight beautifully, Commander, elegant, efficient, mathematically precise. But you fight like you expect your enemy to follow the same rules. On the display, human ships began deploying what appeared to be random debris fields between the Coalition fleet and the advancing Void Hunters. Zethkar recognized the signature of human innovation, turning anything available into a weapon. The Void Hunters feed on energy, Park explained from his station. Conventional weapons actually make them stronger. So we're not using conventional weapons. What are you using? Santos answered without looking up from her tactical console. Remember what you learned about human warfare, Commander. We don't just fight with our technology, we fight with our imagination. The Void Hunters reached the debris field and began feeding on the energy signatures they detected. That's when Zethkar realized what the humans had done. The debris wasn't random wreckage. It was a carefully constructed trap. Negative energy cascades, Park announced with satisfaction. Instead of feeding them energy, we're feeding them the absence of energy. Their absorption processes are designed to consume matter and convert it to usable forms. They can't process nothing. The effect was immediate and devastating. As the Void Hunters attempted to feed on the negative energy signatures, their own energy matrices began destabilizing. Ships that had consumed the matter of entire worlds began flickering like dying stars. Phase 2, Chen announced. What happened next redefined Zethkar's understanding of coordinated warfare. The Coalition fleet, representing 17 different species with 17 different tactical doctrines, moved as if controlled by a single mind. But instead of the rigid precision of traditional galactic warfare, they moved with the fluid adaptability he had learned to associate with human tactics. Veltar's ships provided covering fire, while hegemony vessels deployed sensor nets. Dominion heavy cruisers created energy screens, while smaller human vessels darted through the formation carrying payloads that Zethkar couldn't identify. The entire fleet functioned like a single organism, something that should have been impossible with so many different command structures and communication protocols. How are you coordinating this? He asked Chen. We're not, she replied. Each ship captain knows the objective and is free to achieve it using whatever methods work best for their species and situation. Instead of trying to control everything from a central command, we're trusting everyone to do what they do best. The concept violated every principle of military command that Zethkar had been taught. And yet, as he watched the battle unfold, he saw its terrifying effectiveness. The Void Hunters, accustomed to facing predictable galactic formations, found themselves unable to adapt to an enemy that seemed to change tactics every few seconds. A hegemony captain discovered that rotating shield frequencies could disrupt Void Hunter energy absorption. Within minutes, that technique was being used by every Coalition ship. A Dominion tactical officer found that targeting the spaces between Void Hunter vessels was more effective than direct attacks. The innovation spread through the fleet like wildfire. It's like watching evolution in real time, Zethkar murmured. That's exactly what it is, Santos confirmed. Humans learned long ago that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about being the most adaptable. We're just applying that principle to galactic warfare. The battle raged for 3 hours, but unlike the desperate struggle Zethkar had witnessed at Kepler 442, this felt more like a dissection. The Coalition fleet systematically dismantled the Void Hunter force using tactics that seemed to evolve moment by moment. Ships that should have been destroyed by energy drain instead used their damage to generate new tactical approaches. Crews that should have been overwhelmed by the alien nature of their enemy instead treated each new challenge as a puzzle to solve. Final phase, Chen announced, and Zethkar braced himself for whatever impossibility the humans would produce next. The remaining Coalition ships began broadcasting something that registered on sensors as a complex energy pattern. To Zethkar's surprise, he realized it was music, specifically human music. Dozens of different songs in dozens of different languages, all harmonizing into something that made his secondary brain fire pleasurable calculations. The effect on the Void Hunters was immediate and catastrophic. Beings that existed as pure energy found themselves responding to patterns of organized sound, their consciousness fracturing as they tried to process aesthetic beauty, a concept their species had never developed. Music? Zethkar asked in disbelief. Art, Chen corrected. Beauty, the one thing in the universe that has no practical purpose and no survival value, but which every sentient species creates anyway. Turns out, if you've evolved to see existence purely in terms of energy consumption, exposure to organized aesthetic expression causes a kind of philosophical system crash. The remaining Void Hunter ships began withdrawing, their energy signatures fluctuating in patterns that suggested confusion, fear, and something that might have been wonder. Coalition Fleet, this is Admiral Chun. Pursuit is not authorized. Let them go. Zethkar turned to stare at her. Let them go. They've destroyed 3 star systems. Chin's expression was thoughtful as she watched the Void Hunters flee. They've never encountered the concept of beauty before, Commander. Right now, they're probably trying to figure out what it means that a species would create something purely because it sounds nice. Dr. Park looked up from his engineering console. Besides, we seeded their ships with cultural information packages. Music, art, literature, poetry, everything we could think of that represents the aesthetic achievements of coalition species. You're trying to convert them? We're trying to give them options other than consuming everything in a galaxy, Santos replied. Humans learned a long time ago that the best way to end a war is to give your enemies something better to do than fight. As the coalition fleet began rescue and recovery operations, Zethkar found himself composing another report that Coalition Command would find difficult to believe. How could he explain that humanity had not only revolutionized galactic warfare, but had turned it into something that resembled art more than combat? Commander, Chin's voice interrupted his thoughts. I wanted to thank you. For what? For giving us the chance to show the galaxy who we really are. She gestured to the tactical display, where coalition ships from 17 different species worked together with an efficiency that would have been impossible 2 years earlier. You could have reported that humans were too dangerous for coalition membership. Instead, you helped us find our place. Zethkar considered her words. And what place is that? Chin's smile was softer than any he had seen from her before. Teachers. We're really good at helping other species remember what they're capable of when they stop limiting themselves to what they think is possible. 3 months later, Zethkar received a priority communication from Coalition Command. The Void Hunters had made contact, requesting negotiations for peaceful coexistence. Their initial transmission consisted entirely of music, crude by Coalition standards, but recognizably artistic. In his final report on human integration into Coalition military forces, Zethkar wrote, "Humanity has taught us that warfare is not about the application of superior force, but about the creativity to find solutions that transcend traditional conflict. They have shown us that the most devastating weapon in any arsenal is the refusal to accept that victory requires the destruction of one's enemy." But in his personal log, sealed for 50 years, he wrote something different. "Today I realize that humans don't actually want to win wars. They want to end them. And they're willing to become whatever they need to become to make that happen. The galaxy is safer with them in it, but I'm not sure the galaxy deserves them." Years later, when coalition historians studied the transformation of galactic military doctrine, they would identify humanity's integration as the beginning of what they called the creative peace, an era when conflicts were resolved through innovation rather than destruction. But those who had witnessed humanity's early battles knew the truth. Humans hadn't changed warfare because they were naturally peaceful. They had changed warfare because they were so devastatingly effective at it that they had made traditional combat obsolete. The most terrifying warriors in galactic history had chosen to become teachers instead, and the galaxy was better for it.